The judge's gavel slammed down like a gunshot, echoing through the packed courtroom. "Remove that medal immediately," Judge Miller barked, glaring down at me with pure contempt. "This court is not a place for cheap military dramatics." Across the aisle, my sister-in-law Brenda smirked, leaning back as if she'd already won everything: my late brother's legacy, the family estate, and my dignity. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. Everyone expected me to plead, to cry, or to take off the Navy Cross pinned over my heart. Instead, I stood tall, unpinned the medal, and set it calmly on the table. I said nothing. But as my attorney quietly plugged a secure drive into the podium and projected our evidence onto the screens, Judge Miller's smug expression vanished. His face went pale. He didn't know it yet, but demanding I surrender that medal was the exact mistake that would destroy his career forever. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and after 12 years of serving as an officer in the U.S. Navy, I thought I'd seen every face of human cruelty. I was wrong. The real war didn't start overseas. It started the moment I stepped back onto civilian soil for my brother's funeral. David was everything to me. But while the ink on his death certificate was still wet, his widow, Brenda, was already treating his life like an open auction. Brenda was a master of artificial grief, dabbing away non-existent tears for the cameras while quietly emptying David's bank accounts in the background. I didn't care about the money. I only wanted to protect our family's historic homestead and the military trust fund David had set aside for his children. But Brenda saw me as a threat, an obstacle standing between her and a payday. Within 3 weeks of my brother being laid to rest, a process server knocked on my front door. Brenda was suing me for full ownership of the estate, accusing me of elder manipulation and claiming I had no legal right to my own family legacy. She wanted to strip me of everything, including my dignity. What she didn't realize was that 12 years in uniform taught me one crucial lesson: never start a fight, but always finish it. In the months leading up to our court date, Brenda launched a quiet, systematic campaign to destroy my reputation. She went to every extended family member, every old friend of David's, painting me as a cold, heartless military woman who had abandoned her family for years only to swoop back in and steal what wasn't hers. People I had known my entire life stopped returning my calls. Whispers followed me whenever I walked into town. Brenda wanted me isolated, exhausted, and desperate enough to settle out of court. She almost succeeded, until I hired a private forensic accountant to review the estate's paper trail. What we uncovered made my blood run cold. Brenda hadn't just waited for David to pass. She had been systematically liquidating his assets while he was still lying in his hospital bed. Forged signatures, shell companies, and fraudulent transfers. She was draining the trust fund meant for David's children, long before he breathed his last breath. My lawyer urged me to expose her immediately. He wanted to blow her case wide open right then and there, but I told him to hold his fire. I knew how Brenda operated. If I cornered her early, her expensive attorneys would find a legal loophole or delay the trial until I ran out of funds. No, she needed to feel completely invincible. I wanted her to walk into that courtroom believing she had already won, surrounded by her lawyers and her lies. I kept the financial evidence secured, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Brenda thought she was playing a simple game of greed, but she had no idea she was walking straight into a battlefield. The morning of the trial arrived with a heavy, suffocating rain. As I walked into the county courthouse wearing my official Navy dress uniform, complete with the medals I had earned over 12 years of service, the tension in the air was palpable. Brenda was already sitting at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 high-priced attorneys in tailored suits. She wore an expensive black dress, putting on a flawless performance of a grieving, victimized widow. When Judge Arthur Miller took the bench, my heart sank slightly. He was notorious throughout the county, an arrogant, dismissive judge who ruled his courtroom like a petty kingdom. From the moment he called the court to order, his bias was plain for everyone to see. He smiled warmly at Brenda's legal team while throwing cold, disdainful glares toward my table. Brenda's lead attorney stood up for his opening remarks. He barely spoke about the estate laws. Instead, he pointed a sharp finger directly at me, raising his voice for the jury and spectators to hear. "Your Honor," he sneered, "the defense is attempting to manipulate this court. Look at her, wearing a full-dress uniform and military decorations to a civil property dispute. It is a cheap, desperate stunt designed to buy sympathy and intimidate this room." The courtroom buzzed with quiet gasps. Brenda leaned back in her chair, a subtle, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had successfully framed my service as a gimmick. But the trap was truly sprung when Judge Miller slammed his gavel down, his face flushed with irritation. He leaned over the bench, glaring directly into my eyes, and demanded the one thing he thought would break my spirit. "Remove that medal immediately!" Judge Miller barked, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "This court is not a venue for political theater or military dramatics. Take it off, Ms. Brooks, or I will hold you in contempt." The room fell completely silent. I could hear the rain heavy against the tall windows. Across the aisle, Brenda's smirk widened into a look of absolute victory. She expected me to snap. She expected me to argue, to burst into tears, or to make a scene that would give the judge an excuse to throw me in a holding cell and rule against me on the spot. Instead, I met Judge Miller's eyes with absolute calm. I slowly reached up, unpinned the Navy Cross from my uniform jacket, and placed it down on the wood table in front of me with deliberate care. I didn't say a single word. My silence was heavier than any argument I could have made. That was when my attorney quietly stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply walked to the podium, plugged a secure encrypted drive into the court system, and projected our evidence directly onto the screens in front of the bench and the jury. "Your Honor," my lawyer said smoothly, "we respect the court's order. However, before we proceed any further with the plaintiff's arguments, we must present a mandatory motion for immediate judicial recusal and emergency review." Judge Miller frowned, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "On what grounds?" he snapped, staring at the monitor powering on. "On the grounds of undisclosed financial conflict of interest and felony wire fraud," my attorney replied. The color drained from Judge Miller's face as the financial transfers loaded onto his screen. The room went cold, and Brenda's triumphant smirk vanished into thin air. Displayed on those screens was the complete paper trail my forensic team had spent months assembling. It didn't just expose Brenda's illegal liquidation of my brother's accounts, it connected her directly to Judge Miller. 6 months before David died, Brenda's family business had transferred nearly $200,000 into an offshore shell account registered in the Cayman Islands. The sole beneficiary of that account was a holding company owned by Judge Miller's brother-in-law. It wasn't just a conflict of interest, it was a brazen, illegal payoff to guarantee that any future estate disputes regarding my family's land would be ruled in Brenda's favor. Judge Miller's hands began to shake as he read through the bank statements, wire transfers, and sworn affidavits appearing on his monitor. The arrogant demeanor he had maintained all morning shattered into sheer panic. He looked up from the bench, his eyes wide and wild, searching the gallery. In the back row sat 2 men in dark gray suits who had quietly entered right after me. They weren't spectators. They were investigators from the State Commission on Judicial Conduct and agents from the federal prosecutor's office, alerted by my attorney early that morning. "Your Honor," my lawyer continued, his voice echoing through the dead silent room, "we have already transmitted this evidence to the Department of Justice. We request an immediate stay of proceedings and the immediate surrender of all estate management rights to my client." Brenda turned to her high-priced lawyers, her voice rising in a pitch of frantic desperation. "Do something! Fix this!" But her legal team was already packing their briefcases, stepping away from her table to distance themselves from a burning ship. Brenda's grand scheme had collapsed in a matter of seconds, leaving her exposed, ruined, and completely defenseless. The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Judge Miller slowly lowered his gavel, unable to utter a single word in his own defense. Within minutes, the federal agent stepped forward from the back row to serve formal subpoenas directly to the bench. Judge Miller was escorted out through his private chambers, his judicial career abruptly over, facing looming criminal indictments for bribery and wire fraud. Brenda was left sitting alone at the plaintiff's table, trembling as the substitute judge called the room back to order. With the fraudulent claims and corrupted oversight exposed, the court dismissed her lawsuit with prejudice. Not only was she barred from ever claiming a single cent of my brother's estate, but the judge also ordered an immediate freeze on all her bank accounts, pending a full criminal investigation into her illegal asset liquidation and elder abuse. I stood up from my chair, calmly walked back over to the table, and picked up my Navy Cross. I pinned it back over my heart, where it belonged. It was never just a piece of metal to me. It represented honor, integrity, and the duty to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. David had earned his rest, and now his children's future was permanently secured. Over the following months, the dominoes fell fast. Brenda was forced to sell her luxury vehicles and surrender her personal assets to pay back every dollar she had stolen from my brother's trust fund. Facing multiple felony fraud counts, her lavish lifestyle evaporated into a reality of court hearings and public disgrace. The family homestead, which had stood in our name for 3 generations, remained safe and peaceful, exactly as David had always wanted. Walking through those front doors again, I knew that justice hadn't just been served in a courtroom, it had restored the honor of my family's name. Standing on the courthouse steps that day, watching the storm clouds finally break, I realized that true honor isn't something that can be stripped away by a corrupt judge or stolen by a greedy relative. It's forged in how you stand up when everything is stacked against you. My brother David built his life on integrity, and taking up his fight was the most important duty I've ever fulfilled. Now, I want to ask you, if you were forced to stand alone in that courtroom, stripped of your dignity in front of everyone, would you have stayed silent and let your actions speak? Or would you have fought back right then and there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read through your responses, and hearing your stories means the world to me. If this story reminded you of the power of standing up for what's right, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay strong and stay true.